It all started with a sharp thud, almost a metallic snap, followed by a jolt that sent my heart leaping into my throat. The elevator shuddered, as if something had been ripped from the building's guts, and then, suddenly, the world stopped. The lights flickered once, twice before everything went out, leaving us wrapped in a suffocating darkness and a silence so thick it felt heavy. I've never liked elevators. They've always seemed like vertical tunnels of anxiety to me. But on that day, with her right there, so close, the fear took on a different shape. My name is Clara, and if you've ever been in a situation where time seems to freeze just so you can face everything you feel and try to avoid feeling, then maybe you'll understand what those 12 hours did to me, and to her, and to us. It was late afternoon when I walked into the publisher's building, rushing as always. I'm never on time. A fault of my chronic disorganization, or maybe my habit of observing everything around me as I walk. It was in the lobby, while the elevator was descending, that she appeared. Fernanda, 32 years old, impeccable posture, a gaze that seemed to see right through anyone nearby. She always wore those thick-framed glasses, but the real danger was in her subtle smile. We rode up together, just as we had on so many other silent mornings. But that day was different. There was a tension in the air. Maybe it was the rain threatening to fall, or the fact that we were alone for the first time since that comment in the break room weeks ago, when she'd said, looking directly into my eyes, "Clara, you're a beautiful mess to watch." The elevator shook again, pulling me back to the present. The dim red emergency lights flickered on, casting shadows across our faces. The panel was dead, the alarm button silent. Fernanda took a deep breath and slowly removed her glasses, as if she were also taking off an invisible suit of armor. I shrank into a corner, trying to look calm, but my hands were shaking. The scent of her perfume, something between flowers and damp wood, was intense in that small space, and every minute in there seemed to be pushing us closer to a truth I'd been avoiding for months. I had always admired her confidence, but in that moment, she was the one looking to me for stability. "Are you okay?" she asked, and that's when I realized no one was okay. Not her, not me, and maybe that's what drew us so close. During the first hour, we tried everything. The emergency button, our cell phones, no signal, banging on the door, yelling. Nothing worked. The air seemed to get hotter with each passing minute, and the tension between us grew like a hungry animal. With every exchanged glance, a silent question. How far would you go if the world outside ceased to exist? I didn't know how to act. My legs ached. My insecurities were screaming. I was just a clumsy, 22-year-old intern, full of unanswered questions and fears that stretched back to childhood. She was the editor-in-chief, self-assured, with a life story that seemed to have been written in permanent ink. But there, on the same level, in the same tight spot, without job titles or masks, we were two women trying to deal with what no one ever taught us. What to do when your heart starts speaking louder than your head? She sat on the floor, leaning against the metal wall, and gestured with her chin for me to join her. "Sit down. No one's coming anytime soon." There was a softness in her voice that dismantled my emotional armor. I sat beside her, hesitating slightly, and the silence was filled by our ragged breaths. The muffled sound of rain began to hit the roof of the building, its echo faint inside the elevator. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to imagine I was somewhere else. But her presence next to me was so strong, it was impossible to pretend this was just an accident. I knew something was about to happen, but I had no idea what. When her arm brushed against mine, it was unintentional, but my entire body reacted as if I'd been shocked. She noticed, and she didn't pull away. Instead, she said softly, almost in a whisper, "You know, maybe this is the only place I can really breathe." My heart hammered. It wasn't just about the elevator. It was about her life, about everything she never said, and everything I never said, either. It was about the locked drawers we all keep shut because we're afraid of what might come out. But now, locked in here, there was nowhere left to hide. I could feel the warmth of her body next to mine, the scent of her hair damp from the humid air, and for the first time in a long time, I wanted time to freeze, for no one to open that door, for us to stay there, indefinitely, in a parallel universe where the world had stopped just for the two of us. If you've ever felt torn between the fear of taking a step and the desperate urge to dive in, then maybe you understand what I was feeling in that instant. Because, without saying a word, we understood each other. In the dark, in the silence, in the chaos. It was as if every second was pushing us toward an inevitable revelation. But I wasn't ready. Or maybe I was, and I just didn't know it yet. If you've been through something similar, leave a comment below. I want to know if I'm the only one who's ever gotten lost inside themselves before finding their way in someone else's eyes. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow the next steps of this journey, because what happened next changed everything. The second hour was a deep dive into the unknown. We weren't trying to get out anymore. We weren't waiting to hear footsteps in the hall. All that existed was that stuffy steel box, lit by a red glow that made every feature of her face more intense, closer, more human. I realized I was staring. The way she rested her head against the wall, the way she fidgeted with her fingers without noticing, the way she looked away when she felt exposed. She wasn't just an older woman I admired from a distance at the office. She was someone carrying layers, stories, choices, and sacrifices that perhaps even she hadn't fully processed. And there I was, too young, but with an emotional baggage no one saw, feeling like this involuntary prison was the most honest place I had ever been. The conversation started without warning. She said, "The last time I was trapped somewhere, it was inside a marriage that was erasing me." The silence that followed her words felt as if the air had changed density. I didn't know what to say. I didn't ask anything, just looked at her. And that was enough. She continued, her voice trembling but firm. "It was 7 years of smiling for pictures and crying in the bathroom. Because I couldn't be who I was. Because loving another woman was an idea I hid even from myself. I felt a lump in my throat. I hid things too. Not in the same way, but with the same pain. My family knew about my sexuality, but the way they accepted it felt more like cold tolerance than love. And that made me retreat every time I felt something for someone. Maybe that's why, until then, I had only collected crushes that never left my imagination. And she, Fernanda, was the biggest of them all. It started as professional admiration, slid into lingering glances in the hallway, then migrated into dreams where she appeared smiling in a way she never did in real life. I kept it all to myself, convinced she would never know, or never feel the same. But there, trapped, with no escape, her words were a key turning a lock inside of me. "I've never told anyone at work about this," she said, looking right at me. "But with you, it feels like I can, like I should." I wasn't sure if I was breathing correctly. My heartbeat felt like a runaway drum inside my chest. It was then that the elevator shuddered again, just for a second. We went on alert, but nothing changed. It was as if the universe was telling us, "Not yet, there's more." She let out a nervous laugh, and I joined in, as if laughter was our only defense against vulnerability. And then, as if stumbling over my own emotions, I confessed, "I'm afraid of caring too much for people who might leave." She didn't answer right away. She just took my hand. And in that touch, with no explicit intention, something pulsed between us. It wasn't sudden passion or rushed desire. It was recognition, as if our pain grew from similar roots, despite our different ages, histories, and realities. More hours passed like that. We opened up. We talked about failures, about longing, about how life had pushed us into roles we didn't choose. I told her about my first heartbreak, when I was dumped over a text message. She told me about the first woman she ever loved, a college professor, but never had the courage to tell her. The conversation danced between tragic and sweet. Each memory was like a candle lit in the emotional darkness surrounding us. At some point, our knees were aching, the heat was unbearable, and yet neither of us wanted the door to open. "You know what's crazy?" she said. "I spend my days trying to seem strong. And here, trapped with you, I feel freer than I have in years." It was in that moment that I understood that maybe everything in my life had been preparing me for this. That maybe some encounters can only happen when the world outside goes silent, when distractions disappear, when all that's left is you, the other person, and the truth. I looked into her eyes, for the first time, without looking away, without hiding. If this elevator never opens again, I don't care, I said. And it wasn't an exaggeration. It was raw, unfiltered, true feeling. She smiled, that smile I had only seen in my dreams. And then, in a slow, almost reverent gesture, she rested her forehead against mine. "You're the most beautiful mess I've ever been trapped with," she whispered. And I broke down, not from sadness, but from relief, from a love that had been held in for too long. If you've ever lived through a moment where everything stopped and time became just a detail, then tell me about it in the comments. I want to know if other people have also found themselves when everything seemed to be going wrong. And if you're still here, it's because this story spoke to you in some way. The third part of our voluntary confinement began when, exhausted from talking, we leaned against each other in silence. The temperature in the elevator seemed to have risen, but it wasn't just the stale air. It was the heat coming from our closeness, from our intertwined breathing, from the silent complicity settling between us. She was so near I could hear the rhythm of her heart change as my hand settled into hers. For a few minutes, I closed my eyes and wished the entire world outside would disappear, that no rescue team would find us, that no lights would flicker back on. Because in that microcosm of steel and confessions, I had found a peace I'd never found anywhere else. But the truth is, fear doesn't just vanish, it transforms. And as we grew closer and closer, I felt a conflict rising inside me. It was like my mind was screaming, "Take it slow," but my whole body was already there, surrendered, accepting this connection without resistance. "Fernanda," I started, my voice low. She looked at me with that attentive expression that always disarmed me, and I continued, "What if this is only beautiful because we're trapped in here?" She was silent, not out of doubt, but because she chose her response with care. "Clara, anything that's real survives time and open doors. I don't know what will happen when this is over, but I know that what I'm feeling right now isn't an illusion." That sentence cut through me. I, who had always been insecure, who grew up hearing I was too much, too intense, too dramatic, too sensitive, found myself being loved for being exactly that, for being me. And it was in that emotional opening that she moved closer, slowly, like someone who doesn't want to invade, but wants to be let in. Our lips met like someone feeling their way through the world for the first time. It wasn't a movie kiss. It was a real one, nervous, with hitched breaths and trembling fingers. But it was ours. And there, in the dim light of the elevator, I felt whole, for the first time, without hiding parts of myself, without needing to seem ready or confident or overly mature. After that, the conversation grew lighter. We laughed at the absurdity of the situation, made jokes about who would write a book about this first, and even pretended we were on a secret reality show. It was as if that kiss had broken a tension that had been building for months. But deep down, I knew. The real test would come when the door opened, when the lights came on, when we went back to being the editor-in-chief and the intern in the real world. I tried not to think about it, but it was impossible not to feel the weight of what was coming. "Are you scared of tomorrow?" I asked. She took a deep breath before answering. "I'm scared of going back to pretending, of looking at you in the hallway and not being able to really see you." Her fear was my fear too. The difference was that for me, love was still under construction. And maybe because of that, I was braver. Because when you have nothing to lose, you risk everything. I held her face in my hands and said, "We don't have to figure everything out right now, but I know that what started in here isn't going to end when the door opens." She smiled, and the world seemed to breathe with us. The clock on my phone showed it was almost 5 in the morning. We had been through every possible phase of a love story, the discovery, the fear, the surrender, and now, the hope. It was then, as if to test us until the very last second, that the elevator shook again, and this time, the lights flickered more intensely. The panel lit up. The emergency buttons started working again, and within a few minutes, we heard voices outside. "Is anyone in there?" a man shouted. Fernanda looked at me as if waking from a dream. "This is it," she said. And I knew that the now of the real world was different. We shared one last silent, knowing look and composed ourselves. Not like people hiding something, but like people preparing to face whatever came next. When the door finally opened, we were greeted by two sleepy-looking technicians with an overly bright flashlight. I stepped out first, my heart pounding. She followed, lightly touching my shoulder with her fingers. No one noticed. No one knew. But we knew, and that's what mattered. We walked in silence to the reception area, where they offered us water and thermal blankets. We declined. We were too warm on the inside. We said goodbye like co-workers, as if nothing had happened. But before I could turn away, she took my arm and said, "Wait for me outside." I waited, and in that instant, I knew it wasn't just the elevator that had trapped us for 12 hours. It was life, forcing us to stop, to listen, to feel, to truly live. If this story touched you in some way, tell me in the comments. Have you ever had an intense experience in a completely unexpected moment? And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now's your chance, because this story isn't over. Outside, the city was beginning to wake up, but for me, everything still felt suspended in time. The wet streets reflected the yellow light of the lampposts, and a cold wind swept between the buildings, clearing away the last traces of the night. I leaned against the railing at the building's entrance and waited. My body was present, but my mind was still stuck in that steel box where everything had started to change. Her words echoed inside me, and though there was fear, something new was also growing: courage. When Fernanda appeared, her blazer gone, her hair down, and her glasses hanging from the collar of her shirt, I knew she was no longer just that untouchable woman from the office. She was someone who had let me in, and that changed everything. She approached slowly, as if each step carried the weight of the decision to come. "Want to walk with me for a bit?" she asked. I just nodded, and so we walked, with no destination, no rush. The sound of our footsteps on the wet pavement mixed with the distant rumble of a bus and the lonely song of a bird lost in the concrete jungle. It was strange how the silence between us seemed to say so much. And once again, it was she who spoke first. "Clara, I'm scared of what this could mean, but I'm even more scared of pretending it didn't happen." That broke me down, because I was scared too. Scared of it being a mistake, scared she would regret it, scared we'd go back to Monday and pretend it was just a moment of weakness. "I don't want this to become a secret," I replied, feeling my heart in my throat. "But I don't want it to become just a memory either." We stopped in front of a still-closed bakery. The aroma of bread was starting to seep through the cracks in the door, and that smell transported me to a place of childhood, of home. Maybe that's what I had been searching for all these years. A home in someone, an affection that didn't need approval. She looked at me, that gaze that sees right through you, that asks without speaking. And right there, on the empty sidewalk of some random neighborhood, she said, "We can try, slowly, in our own way." I smiled, a small but real smile, because that was exactly what I needed to hear. And because in that moment, I knew that even if everything fell apart, I was no longer the same person. Something inside me had been awakened. In the following days, everything changed, and at the same time, nothing did. At work, we remained professional. She maintained her composure, her deadlines, her direct emails, but now there was a second glance, a second layer, a whole universe hidden in every good morning. During breaks, we'd have coffee like two colleagues who understood each other in silence. But sometimes, our hands would touch for a few seconds too long. At night, we exchanged short messages. Simple things, but loaded with meaning. Until the invitation came. "Tonight, after work, do you want to come over to my place?" My heart raced. It was the beginning of something real. Outside the elevator, outside of confinement, and that scared me more than the 12 hours we were locked in together. The night at her place was a chapter in itself. The apartment was cozy, with soft lighting, the scent of incense, and jazz playing softly in the background. She cooked something simple but delicious, and we laughed like two teenagers on a first date. For the first time, we saw each other outside the structure, outside our social roles. Me, without the insecurity of being just the intern. Her, without the armor of the untouchable boss. When we sat on the couch, side by side, our hands found each other without any formality. And there, in a calm, unhurried, unurgent kiss, I understood. What we had experienced in the elevator hadn't been an emotional accident. It had been a portal. But, like in any real story, the world doesn't stop to wait for love to bloom. The following week, the looks in the hallway began. The whispers in the break room. Nothing explicit, but I could feel it. People notice when something changes, even if they don't know exactly what. And that's when the test came. HR announced changes to the team. Management called for an ethical review of internal relationships. I knew what was coming. Fernanda called me into her office, closed the door, and looked at me with tired eyes. "They want to transfer you to another department." It felt like a punch to the gut. "Because of us?" I asked. She nodded, barely making eye contact. "They said it's to avoid a conflict of interest." The world, always more prepared to punish affection than to celebrate it. I wanted to scream, to slam the door, to give up, but she stood up, came over to me, and held my hands. "I can say no. I can fight for you. For us." And it was in that moment that I realized the strength she had, and the strength I had too. "You don't have to," I said. "If we're going to fight, let's do it out there, as equals. Not as a boss and an intern." She smiled, and for the first time, without hiding, without fear, she hugged me right there, with the door wide open. If you've ever had to give up a place to preserve a love, I want to read your story in the comments. And if this part resonated with you, go ahead and leave a like. The transfer happened quickly, with almost no time to think. Within a week, I was in a new building, with a new team, a new routine. But none of it could erase what had happened. The first night I was away, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling a strange emptiness, as if the elevator was still inside me, as if those 12 hours had marked me forever. Fernanda's messages continued, but now they were filled with a silent longing, a desire to be close that couldn't be contained in words. I knew it wouldn't be simple. Life rarely is. But I also knew there was no going back, because once you discover what it's like to be truly seen, you accept nothing less. That Saturday, she showed up at my door. She didn't call. She didn't ask if she could come. She just came. I opened it and found her there with the same intense gaze, but now it was vulnerable, like someone seeking shelter. "I can't pretend anymore," she said. And before I could answer, she pulled me into a hug that felt like it was stitching all my cracks back together. There, in the simple doorway of my apartment, I understood that what we had didn't need a broken elevator or metal walls. What we had could survive in the real world. It could survive the rules, the judgments, the distance. It survived because it was bigger than all of that. We lived through intense weeks. We discovered each other in the details, in laughter, in insecurities, in fears. I learned that she hated thunderstorms, but loved the smell of the earth after it rained. That she was afraid of heights, but felt free dancing barefoot in her living room. She discovered that I sang to myself while doing the dishes, and that I scribbled random phrases in notebooks I never showed anyone. Slowly, we built a universe of our own, full of small things that together were enormous. But of course, the world didn't stop testing us. There were sideways glances, friends who drifted away, painful silences at family gatherings. Still, when I looked at her, everything made sense. It was love. And true love doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to endure. One day, walking down the same street where we had talked in the early morning after the elevator, she stopped, took my hands and said, "If I had to spend another 12 hours trapped, I would choose you, 1,000 times over." I smiled with tears in my eyes, because I knew it wasn't about the elevator. It was about life, about being trapped sometimes by circumstances, but free in your heart, about allowing yourself to live what the world insists you can't. And I answered, I would choose you too, always. It was in that instant that I realized, no matter what came next, we had already won. Because we found each other in the chaos. Because we said yes when everything around us was screaming no. Today, when I look back, I see that the elevator wasn't an accident. It was an invitation, a forced space where the masks fell off and only the truth remained. 12 hours that changed not just the course of my life, but the way I see myself, the way I accept myself, the way I love. And maybe that's what I want to leave you with. The reminder that sometimes it's in the unexpected that we find what's essential. And that loving someone, even with fear, is always better than spending your whole life locked inside yourself. If this story moved you, leave a comment telling me what you would do if you were in that elevator for 12 hours. Have you ever had an encounter that changed everything? Share it with me. And if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, now is the time, because there are many other stories that will make you see yourself, feel something, and maybe even find yourself too.